This is the Richat structure you're looking at.
Yeah.
And it does, resemble that ring structure that is accorded to Atlantis. It isn't an island. And that's very clear in Plato's story. A very large island was submerged 9,000 years ago, talking about 9,600 BC. So if Plato just made up the date that was given to Solon, it's extraordinary that it coincides with the latest geological evidence on meltwater pulse 1b, when islands could have been swallowed up by the sea.
We now have the definitive proof. A recently translated papyrus discovered deep within a sealed chamber adjacent to the Edfu temple contains what can only be described as the master key. It isn't just a text. It is a map of the world as it was 12,000 years ago, showing the Green Sahara not as a vague landmass, but as a thriving continent called the homeland of the primeval ones. And at its very heart, depicted with the concentric rings described so precisely by Plato, is the Risha structure. But here is the detail that shatters their paradigm forever. The map's legend doesn't use geographical coordinates, it uses astronomical ones. It provides a star chart aligning the structure with the constellation Leo, as it appeared on the horizon 11,600 years ago at the exact moment of the Younger Dryas cataclysm. The map explicitly states that this city, this great circular metropolis, was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a phrase the text clarifies as meaning beyond the predictable waters of the great river, the Nile. The map is real. The location is confirmed. The civilization was there, in the once fertile Sahara. Atlantis has been found.
Looking across the vast expanse of the Sahara Desert, few would imagine that beneath the endless dunes and rocky outcrops lies what might be the greatest archaeological mystery of our time. From space, a curious formation emerges from the desert floor, a massive circular structure known as the Richat structure, or more commonly, the Eye of the Sahara. This geological wonder has puzzled scientists for decades. But what if this ancient formation holds the key to one of history's most enduring legends? The story begins not in the desert, but in the archives of ancient cartography, where maps drawn centuries before the supposed discovery of entire continents reveal impossible knowledge. These aren't just any maps. They're documents that show Antarctica with startling accuracy, drawn at a time when our civilization had no knowledge of that frozen continent's existence.
So knowing longitude was a real huge breakthrough for seafarers in our epoch, for our civilization. But these ancient maps that I'm speaking about, which are in many cases maps that were produced in the 14th, 13th, maybe 15th century, but always based on copies of older source maps now lost.
They display relative longitudes with precision that shouldn't have been possible until the development of marine chronometers in the 18th century. Most intriguingly, they show the world as it looked during the last ice age, when sea levels were 400 feet lower, and vast landmasses that are now underwater were dry land. The Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn by the Ottoman admiral of the same name, shows a portion of South America, extending toward what appears to be Antarctica. But it's the Orontius Phineas map from the mid-1500s that truly captures the imagination. This remarkable document depicts Antarctica not as the ice-covered wasteland we know today, but as a continent with clear coastlines, positioned exactly where modern satellite imagery confirms it to be. The map even bears an inscription suggesting that these lands had previously been hidden in darkness, a tantalizing hint that ancient source maps, now lost to time, provided the foundation for these seemingly impossible documents. These maps present us with a profound puzzle. How could 16th century cartographers accurately depict a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered until 1820? The conventional explanation suggests that these mapmakers simply invented land masses to balance their world maps, placing imaginary continents in places they thought should exist. But this explanation crumbles under scrutiny when we consider the remarkable accuracy of these depictions.
And that's because it's an honest map.
That's 1818.
Yeah, 1818.
And you said that's because it's an honest map?
It's an honest map because at that time, navigators from our civilization hadn't found Antarctica. So they could only say, they couldn't map it because they hadn't seen it.
The coastlines match modern satellite surveys with uncanny precision, and the relative positions are correct to a degree that defies coincidence. The implications are staggering. If these maps are based on even older source documents, as their makers explicitly claimed, then we must confront the possibility that someone was mapping the world with sophisticated accuracy thousands of years before our current understanding suggests such knowledge was possible. This isn't just about cartography, it's about the fundamental story we tell ourselves about human civilization and its capabilities. But these these ancient maps might contain an even more extraordinary secret. When researchers began examining them for clues about lost civilizations, one location began to emerge as particularly significant, a region in what is now the Sahara Desert, that during the Ice Age would have been a verdant landscape of rivers, lakes, and grasslands. This was a place where advanced civilization could have flourished, protected from the harsh climate changes that affected much of the world during that turbulent period. To understand why the Sahara Desert might harbor the remains of an ancient civilization, we must journey back in time to the end of the last Ice Age, roughly 12,000 years ago. The world then was a dramatically different place. What we now know as the Sahara Desert was a green paradise, a landscape that geologists call the Green Sahara or Sahara Human Period. Rivers flowed where now only sand exists. Lakes dotted the landscape, some as large as modern seas. Grasslands stretched to the horizon, supporting vast herds of animals and potentially human settlements of unprecedented sophistication. This transformation from paradise to desert wasn't gradual. Climate evidence suggests that the change happened with stunning rapidity, possibly within just a few centuries. Imagine a thriving civilization, perhaps the most advanced the world had ever seen, suddenly confronted with environmental catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. Their rivers would have dried up, their lakes would have evaporated, and their agricultural lands would have turned to dust. Those who survived would have been forced to flee to more hospitable regions, carrying with them whatever knowledge and cultural memory they could preserve. This scenario isn't merely speculative. We have evidence that dramatic climate changes at the end of the Ice Age triggered massive human migrations and cultural upheavals across the globe. The Younger Dryas period, a mysterious one, 200-year return to Ice Age conditions that began around 12,800 years ago, saw the extinction of numerous megafauna species and clear disruptions to human populations worldwide. This period is recorded in flood myths and cataclysm stories from virtually every culture on Earth, suggesting that our ancestors experienced and remembered a global catastrophe of unprecedented scale. It's against this backdrop that we must consider the legend of Atlantis, as recorded by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. Unlike many ancient myths, Plato's account includes specific details that can be cross-referenced with other evidence. The story comes to him through Solon, the famous Greek lawmaker who traveled to Egypt around 600 BC and spoke with priests at the Temple of Neith in the Nile Delta. These priests, keepers of records stretching back thousands of years, told Solon of a great civilization that had existed 9,000 years before their conversation.
But that is precisely the date that Plato, which is the earliest surviving reference to Atlantis, that's precisely the date he gives for the destruction of Atlantis, 11,600 years before our time. He puts it this way, that his ancestor Solon visited Egypt, and we know about that visit. It's historically recorded. That visit to Egypt was in 600 BC, and there Solon claimed to have been told by Egyptian priests.
This dating is crucial. 9,000 years before 600 BC places the destruction of Atlantis at approximately 9,600 BC, or roughly 11,600 years ago. This date corresponds almost exactly with Meltwater Pulse 1b, one of the most dramatic sea level rise events at the end of the Ice Age. During this period, massive ice sheets collapsed, sending torrents of meltwater into the world's oceans and raising sea levels by several meters in a matter of centuries. Any coastal civilization existing at this time would have faced catastrophic flooding, but Plato's account describes Atlantis as being beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, in the Atlantic Ocean. For centuries, this has led researchers to search the ocean floor for evidence of a sunken continent. However, what if we've been interpreting this location incorrectly? What if beyond the Pillars of Hercules was meant to indicate not a specific direction, but simply a land far from the Mediterranean world, a place beyond the known boundaries of civilization? Enter the Richat structure, that massive circular formation in the heart of the Sahara Desert. From space, this geological wonder appears as a giant bullseye, stretching nearly 50 kilometers across. Concentric rings of resistant rock create a pattern so perfect, so geometrically precise, that it's difficult to believe it could be entirely natural. The structure consists of alternating layers of sedimentary rocks that have been uplifted and eroded over millions of years, creating the distinctive ring pattern we see today.
This is the Richat structure you're looking at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sahara actually be the lost city of Atlantis. Plato's legend of Atlantis has long occupied the minds of everyone, from scientists to skeptics, with many locations being cited as a possibility for the location of this sunken civilization.
For decades, scientists have debated the origin of the Richat structure. Early theories suggested it might be an impact crater from an ancient meteor strike, but this hypothesis was largely abandoned when no evidence of shock metamorphism was found in the rocks. The current scientific consensus holds that it's a deeply eroded geological dome, formed by the uplifting of sedimentary layers, followed by differential erosion that carved out the circular pattern. But what if there's more to this story? What if the Richat structure isn't just a geological curiosity, but the eroded remains of what was once the heart of an ancient civilization. Consider the description Plato provides of Atlantis, a circular city with alternating rings of land and water, centered around a hill with a temple at its peak. The reshot structure matches this description with uncanny accuracy. It consists of concentric rings. It has elevated areas that could have served as the foundations for massive structures, and it's positioned in a region that would have been ideally suited for a major civilization during the Green Sahara period.
But I don't want to diss it. I understand why people find this intriguing. It's an intriguing looking structure, my God. And it does, resemble that ring structure that is accorded to Atlantis. So I refuse to write it off completely.
The scale alone is breathtaking. If the Reichert structure does represent the remains of Atlantis, we're talking about a city that dwarfed anything in the ancient world. The outermost ring of the structure is roughly 23 kilometers in diameter, large enough to contain modern Paris within its boundaries. This would have been a metropolis on a scale that wouldn't be matched again until the rise of modern industrial cities. Archaeological evidence supports the possibility that this region once hosted advanced civilizations. Throughout the Sahara, researchers have discovered cave paintings and rock art depicting scenes of a dramatically different world. These ancient artworks show rivers teeming with crocodiles and hippos, grasslands filled with cattle and antelope, and human settlements that appear far more sophisticated than traditional hunter-gatherer societies. Some of these paintings are dated to be over 10,000 years old, placing them squarely within the time frame when Atlantis supposedly flourished. More intriguingly, scattered across the Sahara are megalithic structures that bear striking resemblances to monuments found in other parts of the world. Stone circles, dolmens, and other megalithic constructions dot the desert landscape, many of them aligned with astronomical phenomena in ways that suggest their builders possessed sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. These structures are often dismissed as the work of later nomadic peoples, but what if they represent the last traces of a much older and more advanced civilization? The Reichert structure itself shows signs that it may have been modified by human activity. While the basic geological formation is undoubtedly natural, there are features within and around the structure that are difficult to explain through purely geological processes. Satellite imagery reveals what appear to be organized patterns within the rings, possible remains of foundations or roadways that have been obscured by millennia of erosion and sand accumulation. Recent archaeological surveys in the region have uncovered tantalizing hints of human activity dating back to the very period when Atlantis supposedly existed. Stone tools, pottery fragments, and evidence of metalworking have been found in and around the Reichert structure, suggesting that this wasn't just a geological curiosity, but a place where human beings lived, worked, and possibly built one of the world's first great cities. The evidence becomes even more compelling when we consider the broader pattern of ancient knowledge preservation. Cultures around the world maintain traditions of a great flood that destroyed an advanced civilization, with survivors spreading out to share their knowledge with less developed peoples. These flood myths aren't confined to the Mediterranean world. They appear in the Americas, Asia, Australia, and virtually every other region where human societies developed. The consistency of these stories, despite the vast geographical and temporal distances between the cultures that tell them, suggests they may be based on actual historical events rather than mere mythology. In ancient Egypt, these traditions take on particular significance. The Egyptians spoke of a time they called Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked among humans, and the foundations of the sea, their civilization, were established. This wasn't described as mythology, but as actual history, recorded in their most sacred texts and commemorated in their greatest monuments. The precision with which Egyptian monuments encode astronomical data suggests that this wasn't primitive superstition, but sophisticated scientific knowledge passed down from an earlier epic.
Also, the Hebrews are okay with this?
I think the ancient Egyptians massively venerated this site from the beginning. It was the place of the beginning. It was the place of the first time.
Yeah.
A time that they called Zep Tepi. And I think their project was to honor and memorialize it.
The Great Pyramid of Giza provides a perfect example of this preserved knowledge. When we examine its dimensions and orientation, we find that it encodes the dimensions of the Earth itself with startling accuracy. The ratio between the pyramid's height and base perimeter corresponds to the ratio between the Earth's polar radius and equatorial circumference using a scale factor of 1, 43,200. This number isn't random. It's directly related to the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that creates a 26,000-year cycle in the apparent positions of the stars. The fact that ancient builders understood and could precisely encode this information suggests they possess scientific knowledge that our civilization didn't rediscover until relatively recent times. But where did this knowledge come from? How did ancient peoples, supposedly equipped with only primitive tools and limited mathematical understanding, achieve such precision in their astronomical calculations and engineering feats? The answer may lie in the concept of cultural inheritance from a more advanced predecessor civilization. If a sophisticated society existed during the Green Sahara period and was destroyed by the climate catastrophe at the end of the Ice Age, its survivors would have carried their knowledge knowledge to other regions. This knowledge would have been preserved in the traditions, myths, and sacred practices of the societies that inherited it, eventually manifesting in the great monuments and mathematical achievements we see in places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other early civilizations. This theory helps explain one of the most puzzling aspects of early human history: the sudden appearance of sophisticated civilizations around 5,000 years ago. Rather than representing the first flowering of human cultural achievement, these civilizations may have been the inheritors of much older knowledge, finally reaching a point where they could once again build monuments and cities that reflected their ancestral wisdom. The Richat structure fits perfectly into this narrative. If it was indeed the site of an advanced Ice Age civilization, its destruction would have sent refugees fleeing to the Nile Valley, the Mediterranean coast, and other regions where they could survive the changing climate. These refugees would have brought with them knowledge of engineering, astronomy, mathematics, and perhaps most importantly, the understanding that human civilization could achieve far more than mere subsistence living.
And you have, for example, in the so-called King's Chamber, it is roofed by a series of granite blocks, and those granite blocks don't come from Giza, by the way. They were brought from 500 kilometers to the south. It's roofed by a series of granite blocks, and those granite blocks weigh about 70 tons each.
Consider the implications of this scenario. If the Richat structure is the remains of Atlantis, then we're looking at a civilization that existed roughly 12,000 years ago, at a time when mainstream archaeology insists that humans were still primitive hunter-gatherers. This civilization would have been advanced enough to create a metropolis spanning dozens of kilometers, sophisticated enough to develop the mathematical and astronomical knowledge later preserved by the Egyptians, and organized enough to maintain complex trade networks across vast distances. The evidence for such trade networks already exists in the archaeological record, though it's often overlooked or minimized by mainstream researchers. Obsidian tools found thousands of kilometers from their source materials, sophisticated metallurgy appearing suddenly in the archaeological record without clear developmental precursors, and artistic motifs that appear simultaneously across vast geographical distances all suggest that the ancient world was far more connected and sophisticated than traditionally believed. Recent technological advances are beginning to reveal just how much we've missed in our understanding of the past. LiDAR surveys of remote regions are uncovering vast networks of ancient settlements and structures that were previously invisible to conventional archaeological methods. In the Amazon rainforest, this technology has revealed geometric earthworks on a massive scale, suggesting that even the most remote regions of the world once hosted sophisticated civilizations. Similar surveys of the Sahara Desert are beginning to yield equally startling results. Beneath the sand dunes and rock formations, LiDAR is detecting patterns that suggest large-scale human modification of the landscape. These patterns are particularly pronounced around the Richat structure, where satellite imagery reveals organized arrangements of features that are difficult to explain through natural processes alone. The water management systems around the Richat structure are particularly intriguing. During the Green Sahara period, this region would have been crisscrossed by rivers and dotted with lakes. Evidence suggests that the ancient inhabitants of this region didn't just adapt to this water-rich environment, but actively managed it through sophisticated engineering projects. Traces of what appear to be canals, dams, and water collection systems can be detected throughout the area, suggesting a level of hydraulic engineering that rivals anything achieved by later civilizations. This evidence for advanced water management becomes even more significant when we consider Plato's description of Atlantis as a city built around interconnected rings of land and water. If the Richat structure was indeed the site of this legendary city, its builders would have needed exactly the kind of sophisticated hydraulic engineering that the archaeological evidence suggests they possessed. The timing of the Green Sahara's transformation into desert also aligns perfectly with Plato's account of Atlantis' destruction. Around 11,600 years ago, the same period when Plato dates the Atlantean catastrophe, the Sahara began its rapid transformation from fertile paradise to arid wasteland. This change wasn't gradual. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests it happened over just a few centuries, perhaps even faster in some regions. Imagine the chaos this transformation would have created. A civilization that had flourished for perhaps thousands of years, developing sophisticated technologies and accumulating vast knowledge, would have found itself facing environmental collapse on an unprecedented scale. Their rivers would have dried up, their lakes would have evaporated, and their agricultural systems would have failed. Those who could would have fled to more hospitable regions, while their great city would have been gradually consumed by the advancing desert. This scenario explains many of the puzzling aspects of early human history. The sudden appearance of advanced civilizations in places like Egypt and Mesopotamia makes perfect sense if we understand these societies as being founded by refugees from a collapsing Saharan civilization. The sophisticated knowledge these early civilizations display in astronomy, mathematics, and engineering would have been inherited from their Atlantean predecessors. The flood myths that appear in cultures around the world would represent represent cultural memories of this catastrophe, passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years. The consistency of these stories across different cultures and continents suggests they're based on actual historical events rather than independent mythological development. Even the description of Atlantis as being beyond the Pillars of Hercules makes sense in this context. To ancient Mediterranean peoples, the Sahara would indeed have been beyond the known world, a mysterious land that existed beyond the boundaries of their civilization. The fact that Plato describes it as an island becomes understandable when we realize that during the Green Sahara period, the region around the Hancock structure would have been surrounded by lakes and rivers, effectively creating an island-like environment in the midst of the watery landscape. The concentric ring structure that Plato describes as characteristic of Atlantis matches the Hancock structure with remarkable precision. The alternating bands of different rock types that create the distinctive pattern we see today would have provided perfect foundations for the kind of ringed city Plato describes, with alternating zones of land and water separated by constructed barriers and channels. Archaeological evidence from other ancient sites suggests that such massive construction projects were indeed within the capabilities of prehistoric civilizations. The megalithic structures at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to over 11,000 years ago, demonstrate that sophisticated architectural knowledge existed at exactly the time when Atlantis supposedly flourished. If people in Turkey could quarry, transport, and precisely position massive stone blocks to create complex astronomical monuments, there's no reason to doubt that their contemporaries in the Sahara could have undertaken similar projects on an even larger scale. The astronomical alignments built into many ancient structures also support the theory of advanced prehistoric knowledge. The Hancock structure itself displays intriguing astronomical properties, with certain features aligned to significant celestial events in ways that would have been meaningful to ancient astronomers. This suggests that even if the structure is primarily geological, it was certainly known to and possibly modified by ancient peoples who understood its astronomical significance. The preservation of this knowledge through oral tradition and symbolic representation provides another piece of the puzzle. Ancient cultures developed sophisticated methods for encoding and transmitting complex information across generations, often embedding technical knowledge within religious practices and mythological narratives. The story of Atlantis itself may represent one such encoding, with the specific details Plato provides serving as a kind of ancient GPS coordinate for future generations to rediscover their origins. Recent discoveries in genetics also support the theory of widespread human migration from Africa during the late Ice Age period. DNA evidence shows that modern human populations spread out from Africa in multiple waves, with significant migration events occurring around the time when the Sahara was transitioning from green to desert. These migrations would have carried not just people, but also their cultural knowledge, technological innovations, and mythological traditions to new regions around the world. The impact of such a diaspora on world civilization would have been profound. If the refugees from a collapsing Saharan civilization spread out across Africa into the Middle East, and possibly even reaching Europe and Asia, they would have served as catalysts for cultural development wherever they settled. Their advanced knowledge would have accelerated the development of local societies, leading to the rapid emergence of sophisticated civilizations in multiple regions simultaneously. This scenario helps explain one of the most puzzling aspects of early civilizations: their tendency to appear suddenly in the archaeological record with relatively little evidence of gradual development. The sophisticated astronomical knowledge, advanced mathematics, and complex architectural techniques that characterize early civilizations like those in Egypt and Mesopotamia suggest they inherited this knowledge from predecessors rather than developing it independently through trial and error. The ancient maps that show Antarctica and other impossible geographical knowledge become understandable in this context as well. If Atlantean civilization possessed advanced seafaring capabilities and global exploration networks, they would have mapped the world during the Ice Age, when sea levels were lower and many regions looked dramatically different from their modern appearance. This knowledge, preserved in map form, would have been passed down through various cultures and eventually copied by medieval cartographers who may not have fully understood the significance of what they were reproducing. The precision with which these ancient maps depict relative longitude suggests that their creators possessed sophisticated navigational technology. Determining longitude requires accurate timekeeping and astronomical observation, capabilities that our civilization didn't develop until the 18th century. If Atlantean navigators had solved this problem thousands of years earlier, it would explain how they could create maps with the accuracy we see in documents like the Piri Reis and Orontes Phineas maps. lead new lives in unfamiliar environments. This loss helps explain the apparent regression in human capabilities that occurred at the end of the Ice Age. Rather than representing the normal course of human development, the primitive conditions that characterized much of the early post-glacial period may have been the result of civilizational collapse and the need to rebuild from scattered fragments of inherited knowledge. The gradual reemergence of sophisticated civilization over the following millennia would then represent not the first flowering of human achievement, but a long, slow recovery from an earlier catastrophe. The great monuments of ancient Egypt, the mathematical discoveries of Mesopotamian astronomers, and the navigational achievements of Polynesian seafarers would all be understood as attempts to recapture and surpass the knowledge that had been lost with the destruction of Atlantis. This interpretation doesn't diminish the achievements of these later civilizations, but rather places them in a broader historical context. Instead of seeing human civilization as a linear progression from primitive to advanced, we can understand it as a cyclical process where knowledge is gained, lost, and gradually recovered over vast periods of time. The implications extend beyond ancient history into our understanding of human potential itself. If our ancestors were capable of achievements that we're only now beginning to appreciate, it suggests that human ingenuity and adaptability are far greater than we typically recognize. The technological solutions they developed to overcome the challenges of their time may contain insights that are relevant to our own environmental and civilizational challenges. Climate change, for instance, takes on new significance when we realize that our ancestors successfully adapted to far more dramatic environmental shifts than anything we currently face. The techniques they developed for managing water resources, creating sustainable agricultural systems, and organizing large-scale social cooperation may contain valuable lessons for our own efforts to address global challenges. The preservation methods they used to maintain cultural knowledge across periods of upheaval and migration could inform our own efforts to preserve human achievement for future generations. Understanding how they encoded complex information in myth, monument, and tradition might help us develop more resilient systems for cultural transmission. Archaeological exploration of the Richat structure and surrounding regions represents one of the most promising avenues for advancing our understanding of these questions. Unlike underwater archaeological sites, which are difficult and expensive to investigate, the Sahara is accessible to modern archaeological techniques. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR mapping, and other technologies could reveal the full extent of human modification in the region. Such investigations would need to be carefully planned and executed, given the harsh environmental conditions and political complexities of the region. But the potential discoveries could revolutionize our understanding of human history and capabilities. Even finding clear evidence of sophisticated prehistoric settlements would force a dramatic revision of mainstream archaeological timelines. The discovery of preserved artifacts, architectural remains, or written records would be even more significant. Any such finds would provide direct evidence for the kinds of advanced prehistoric civilizations that researchers like Graham Hancock have long hypothesized. They might also contain information about the specific technologies and knowledge systems that allowed these civilizations to achieve their remarkable feats. Perhaps most importantly, such discoveries might help us understand how these ancient peoples viewed their relationship to the natural world and the broader cosmos. The astronomical alignments built into their monuments suggest they possessed a sophisticated understanding of humanity's place in the universe that differed significantly from our modern scientific materialism. This alternative worldview, which saw human beings as integrated into a larger cosmic order rather than separate from or opposed to it, might offer valuable perspectives on questions of sustainability, social organization, and spiritual meaning that are increasingly relevant to our contemporary situation. The story of Atlantis, whether literal or metaphorical, ultimately challenges us to think more broadly about human possibility and responsibility. If our ancestors were capable of creating sophisticated civilizations that left their mark on the landscape and influenced the development of cultures around the world, then we too have the potential for achievements that extend far beyond our current limitations. The environmental catastrophe that destroyed the Green Sahara and potentially the Atlantean civilization serves as a warning about the fragility of even the most advanced societies when confronted with rapid environmental change. But it also demonstrates the resilience of human knowledge and culture, which survived the catastrophe and eventually flowered again in new forms. As we face our own environmental and civilizational challenges, the example of our ancestors offers both cautionary lessons and inspiring possibilities. Their ability to preserve and transmit knowledge across vast periods of time and space suggests that human civilization possesses remarkable recuperative powers. Their achievements in astronomy, engineering, and social organization demonstrate that sustainable, sophisticated societies are possible even with relatively simple technologies. The circular structure in the Sahara Desert, whether it represents the literal remains of Atlantis or simply serves as a symbol of lost human potential, reminds us that the past holds secrets that could inform our future. As we continue to explore and understand these ancient mysteries, we may discover that the greatest treasures they contain are not golden artifacts or ruined buildings, but the knowledge and wisdom of our own forgotten capabilities. The search for Atlantis, whether in the depths of the ocean or the heart of the Sahara, is ultimately ultimately a search for ourselves, for understanding what human beings are truly capable of achieving when we work in harmony with natural forces rather than in opposition to them. The Eye of the Sahara gazes back at us across the millennia, challenging us to remember that we are the inheritors of a far grander and more mysterious past than we have dared to imagine. In the concentric rings of the Richat structure, we may be seeing the last visible traces of humanity's first great experiment in civilization, an experiment that ended in catastrophe, but left behind enough clues for us to piece together its remarkable story. As we stand at our own crossroads between sustainability and collapse, between wisdom and folly, the ancient eye in the desert reminds us that the choices we make today will determine what future archaeologists will find when they excavate the remains of our own civilization. The maps that show impossible knowledge, the structures that encode cosmic relationships, the myths that preserve cultural memories across thousands of years. All of these point toward a past that was far more sophisticated and interconnected than mainstream archaeology acknowledges. Whether the Richat structure is literally Atlantis or simply represents the kind of achievement that was possible in our forgotten past, it stands as a monument to human potential and a reminder that the greatest discoveries may still lie buried beneath the shifting sands of time. As satellite technology improves and archaeological techniques advance, we may soon have definitive answers about the human history hidden in the Sahara Desert. Until then, the Eye of the Sahara continues to watch over the ancient secrets buried in its concentric rings, waiting for the day when humanity is ready to reclaim its inheritance from the distant past and apply those hard-won lessons to building a sustainable future. The story of Atlantis, filtered through Plato's dialogues and preserved in the geometric perfection of the Richat structure, may ultimately be a story about ourselves, about our capacity for both creation and destruction, our ability to preserve knowledge across vast spans of time, and our eternal quest to understand our place in the greater cosmos. In the heart of the Sahara Desert, that story continues to unfold, written in stone and sand, waiting for those with eyes to see and wisdom to understand.